Hello once again. We are back with our cyberpunk scene. And we're going to talk a little bit more about lights in this video. I'll go over, I did add a couple of extra things when I stopped recording after the last video, just tinkering around and adding. You can see these lights on the garage door are here, and I went around with a little bit more emission. We'll talk about that. Then we're going to talk about setting up some windows to emit light. And I'll pull up a reference image here, or not really a reference, a render that I've already done, and you've seen this before, but I will talk about how I did these windows, and then that'll also cover this sign up here, as well as this glowing monkey neon sign. So that's what we're going to cover in this video. Let's get right into it. So the first thing, as far as what I changed since recording the last video, go into render view here so you can see the effects of the lights. I did make the street lights here a little bit brighter. I grab one of those street lights, there we go. And just for reference, I increased the power up to 1,000 watts. Radius is 0.5 meters. Okay, you can kind of see where that's at. The light over here, we're at 40 watts. Let's see, what else did we add? I added a band of emission to the vending machine. Just give that a little bit of an accent. I added, can't remember if I did this on camera or not. Oh, I think I did do this on video, but I changed the color of the light that's in here. Let me grab the electrical box glow. There it is. I also increased the power to 300 watts. I think it was at like 20 or 10 before. But now it does actually reach down to the ground and gives kind of a nice effect there. I added a very subtle light inside this vent. It's tough to see, but it is there, I promise. There it is. It's kind of way back there. Just to give that a little bit of a glow. And when the vent gets its metallic shader, that'll help that stand out a little bit more as well. I ended up going with just horizontal lines for all of the glow here on the cables. I felt like it worked a little bit better than the vertical lines to my taste, but it doesn't really matter either way. It's whatever you think looks good on your scene. And then I went with adding some more emission to all my electrical panels. I tried to keep it with just a couple of colors. I wanted these to kind of be supplemental and background colors. If we look back at our render, you can see that we're going to have a lot of purple going on. And so these kind of are accent colors. And I stuck mostly with the teal and the yellow. But I did use a couple of I used green over here, and then some red and some orange over here, just as some, minor kind of tertiary accents. But I wanted to keep it relatively monochromatic because I want it to have some life, but I don't want it to be too distracting. And then as far as these lights over here, we go into material preview so we can kind of see the position. I moved the actual garage door mesh. I moved that as far back into the frame as I could. Go to the side view. See, I moved it really far back into the frame, and then I'm tucking the spotlights down right inside here. So you can't see the source of them. And that's the general idea, that the lights would be tucked inside that frame and then just kind of cascading down on the front of the door. Now, one additional thing that I did, you can see they are all at 500 watts, which actually I should probably change that. But if we look down here in our shader editor, we check out the black body node, you can see the color temperature. I subtly changed the color temperature for each one, and not a lot. We have 3100, 3150, and then we have 3400 on the center one. So if I kind of zoom in here and we let this render for a moment, it's, like I said, it's a pretty subtle difference between them, but it is there, and it just gives a little bit of extra texture. And one thing too that we can do, maybe this right one, so I didn't name it door spot right. Maybe we'll bring the power on that one down to like 400. Maybe the bulb is getting old and it's getting ready to die and it's less powerful. Maybe we go 350. Okay, so you can play around with those things just to add a little bit of additional kind of depth and texture to your scenes. It all kind of comes together to help it feel more real. The same thing on these pylon lights. I didn't do it, but you could also go through and just vary the power, vary the intensity of all of them, and even the color a little bit, get a little bit more variety and realism in the scene. If you ever look down like a row of streetlights, especially ones that aren't LED, you'll probably end up seeing a fair amount of variation depending on the age of that individual light. So that's everything that I did for lighting off camera. Again, there's no new techniques there. I did cover everything on video, but I did want to just kind of cover all the additional things that I did in case you wanted to follow along very specifically. Okay, on to some new things. And that's where I want to talk about these images that are emitting light. So I'm calling these windows. You could think of them as windows or billboards, whatever you want them to be. But basically, it's an image texture that's emitting light. And so I want to talk about how to do that. And we'll start over here on this vertical one. Okay. So let me go into Material Preview. I'll turn back on my overlays so I can see what I have selected. And in order for us to develop images, it can be helpful to have the UVs. So when I made this image, let me pull up the image so you can actually see what the final thing looks like. That'll be this. So this is the final image. I pulled a stock image from, I believe I pulled it from pexels.com. I'll pull that up so you can see. So here's Pexels. I like this site. It has a bunch of free open source portraits that or not just portraits, but stock photography that you can use. So I think I searched for like neon portrait. And you can see there's some that are starting to feel kind of cyberpunky, but I wanted something even more so. So then what I did is I searched Google and I found a Photoshop tutorial for making an image look glitched. And so that's roughly the effect of this tutorial. I'm by no means an expert in Photoshop, but I can read and I can follow tutorials. And so as long as you can do those things or watch a video, which if you're watching this, I'm sure you can, then you can get a similar result. So I made that up in Photoshop and then I put it on a square canvas and I just made the background black and then exported it. So that's all I did. I didn't worry actually too much about UVs for this one because I'm going to kind of move them around and adjust it. And then also the image size on this is, if we look at our properties here, this is a 4K image texture. So it gives me plenty of flexibility. If I wanted to zoom in and just have one of the billboards be the eye, I've got enough detail that I can do that. All right, so that's the image. I suppose I can give you a quick peek at the Photoshop document. It was a relatively simple tutorial to follow. I can't remember which one it was. Sorry, I can't link to it, but just do a Google search for, glitch effects Photoshop or something like that, and you'll find a bunch of things. Okay, so there's layers where it breaks out individual color channels, and then I'm just kind of masking them. And then we have our scan lines over the top of it. And then I also have a kind of custom vignette going on there. So minimize that for now because we will end up coming back to Photoshop. So once we have that, now let's start talking about adding it to our scene. So I've got that, the correct object selected. We can go to our material properties here and hit the X, get rid of the test grid, click New, and we will call this window underscore V for vertical. Hit return. Okay. So what we want to do is we want this to be emitting light into the scene. So I'm going to change this from a principled BSDF to a emission shader. I'm also going to turn on screencast keys. There we go. Okay. And as a reminder, As far as add-ons are concerned, I do have Node Wrangler enabled, and that will allow us to use some of these shortcuts that will speed up our process. So again, this is a free built-in add-on. You should just have to check it once and enable it, and as long as you have autosave preferences on, once you click it, it'll be on from now on. Okay. All right, so, oops. Okay, so these two nodes popped up just because the shortcut I used to pause my recording also adds those. So I'm just going to hit Control X and get rid of those two nodes. I just paused recording because there's a plane flying by. All right, so we're going to switch this to an emission shader, and you could delete it and then hit Shift A and go to shader and emission. You can also just select it, hit Shift S to switch, and then choose Shift S, shader, and emission. Okay, so now it's an emission shader. Now we can bring in our texture, and you remember we can just drag and drop. Alternately, you could hit Shift A, add texture, image texture. But if we just drag and drop, it works just fine. It's just a JPEG. I don't have any transparency on here. I'm just going to drag the color into the color. And okay, you can see that's how it maps, which isn't quite what we want. I'm also going to add in our texture mapping nodes as I've covered before. So with the node wrangler enabled, I can just hit Control T, and it will add our texture coordinates in our mapping. You can see it will automatically connect the UV to the vector and connect everything up. So now I can adjust position in all of that. Now you can see that the image is upside down, and that's because my UVs are upside down. So I'm going to change this here over to my UV editor, select my UVs, and just rotate 180 degrees. And that's all we have to do there. Okay. I'm also going to try to stay as zoomed in on this as possible so you can read what's going on. I know when we get to this point, there's going to be a lot of nodes, and readability can be tough. So I'm going to try to keep it as legible as possible. All right, so we have our image in there and applied. Now we need to position it. So I'm going to slide it over in the X direction. And I like just seeing kind of the eye and a little bit of the hand. Oops, I think maybe we'll go something like that. I think it looks pretty good. And if you wanted to scale, we could select all three of these by clicking on the first and dragging down. And then, if we wanted to go, remember, larger numbers will repeat it that many times. Smaller numbers will scale it up. So you could do something like this, but I'm happy with a scale at 1 for everything. So we're going to, whoops. There we go. Okay, so we're back at 1. And yeah, I think we'll stick with that placement. That works for me. Try not to be too picky about it, but there we go. Okay, and we can adjust the vertical position as well if you wanted to do like that old, bad cable CRT effect where it starts to wrap around on itself. You could do something like that. That might look kind of cool. Again, you can even animate these options. We won't for now anyway, but you certainly could. So now let's go to rendered view and see what it looks like. Okay. The answer is it's barely doing anything. It certainly doesn't look like it's glowing. So let's bring this emission up. Let's bring the strength up to 10. That's better. Now it's starting to look like it's glowing, but it's not really affecting the scene as much as I would like it to. All right, so let's increase that some more. You can drag it up. Now we're starting to see it. We'll set this at a nice even 100. It's a good placeholder anyway. So now we're getting some light in the scene, which is awesome. You can see that we have the reflection off the surface, which even when we go to like an asphalt road texture, we'll still see a little bit. We'll see it on the ground, on the sidewalk. We'll see it playing on the truss a little bit. I really like that. However, because we made it so bright, the image is now kind of washed out, and it's too washed out for my taste. So we need to, we kind of need to go back to this 10, but then we lose the light. So what we need to do is we need to find a way to make the camera see it at this intensity, but make the scene, I'll just duplicate our emission shader, see it at an intensity of 100. And there's a node for that. That node is a light path node. So I'm going to hit Shift A and add in an input and light path. Okay. And it's this big long node. You can see there's a whole bunch of different options. You just slide some things around here so we can figure out. There we go. That should work. We can zoom in on this for now. Okay. So we have a bunch of options. Is camera ray, is shadow ray, is diffuse ray. I'm not going to go into all of these options. We really only need to concern ourselves with this first one, is camera ray. I will note that the Blender documentation does describe it. And then the other thing is you can just kind of play around with it, add some different shaders and materials, and kind of start playing around with it. I'm sure there are also other videos on it out there. CG Cookie for sure has a really good breakdown of it, although that is a paid site. It's full of excellent information. But what the light path node does is it allows you to kind of break out how light is calculated for each kind of operation. So is camera ray is shading is executed for a camera ray, otherwise it's 0. So what that means is that, well, let me finish the setup and then we can kind of go through it. So I'm going to split these off. We have 2 emission shaders. And then I'm going to hit Shift A and I'm going to add in a mix shader so that I can combine these 2 shaders. And I think I'm going to need to combine these this way. And then this other emission shader, we need to make sure we put our color texture in that as well. Okay, so now they both have a strength of, or they both have their strength, but they're both getting our image. And right now they're just being mixed 50%. So if you go halfway between these 2 values, you get a value of, what is that, 55? If we go all the way to 0, it's just going to be that first slot, which is a strength of 100. If we go all the way to 1, we're going to get the strength of 10, which is that second slot. But what we can do is we can use this light path node to serve as the factor. So I'm going to drag the is camera ray into the factor. And this is what we get. So what this is doing is it's saying in our first slot, we have an emission strength of 100. So we're saying this window is emitting a strength of 100 worth of light. Okay, 100 light. But the light path is saying if the camera is looking at it, it's only emitting 10. So the camera thinks it's only emitting 10. But when Blender calculates how much light is going to be hitting the ground, it's going to be using this first value. When Blender calculates how much is reflecting off the truss, or when we add a volumetric shader and we've got some haze in the air, it's going to be using this, this first value. But as far as the camera is concerned, when the camera is looking directly at it, it's using that second value. That's extremely useful for exactly this purpose. Now, the reason why I ended up at 10 is if we look in here, let me turn off my viewport overlay so we can just focus. I want to focus on the frame of the window and then the window itself, or the image itself. If I bring the strength down to 1, we get a more accurate representation of what our image actually looks like. But the problem is that the window doesn't look bright enough for the amount of light that's hitting the scene, okay, especially right here on the frame. The frame shouldn't be this bright if the window is only, this bright, if it's darker. So we need to bring that strength up. And as we do, 5 looks better, and I'm actually pretty happy with how 5 looks on camera, but it still doesn't quite look bright enough, and that's why I ended up at 10. It was a good enough compromise. You could break this out even more, and you could do, glossy rays and diffuse rays are a little bit less, but I guess it's way more complicated than we need. This is certainly working for us. Okay. So I'm really happy with that. I'm going to do the same thing for the horizontal window. So I'm going to hit X, and I'm going to create a new material. Actually, no, I'm not. We can do this a faster way. So I'm going to hit Shift and click the X, and it's just going to get rid of that material. I'm going to choose our window vertical, and then I will click on the little copy icon. It's going to add a new material, basically copy the existing one. We'll change the name to window_H for horizontal. And then we can come in here. We can see our node tree is already set up. All we have to do is adjust the mapping to get the image where we want it. So the first thing we need to do, I'm going to set the location to 0, look at this straight on, is we need to scale it so that it fills the frame. So I'm going to click and drag down to select all 3 of those, and then I'm going to drag to the left. I'm going to hold down Shift and drag to the left. Okay, we need to bring this over. Do something like that. We'll bring it down. Now maybe this one is mostly about the eyes. I kind of like that. Let's bring that scale up a little bit. Let's try 0.68 maybe. Just kind of position it wherever we think looks good. I like seeing that little wraparound. So I'll keep that there, but I also like seeing the eye. I don't want to see the black at the end. So looks like we'll go 0.67. There we go. 2.6, I want to be able to slide that eye over a little bit more. Yeah, we're going to go even bigger. It's a little bit of a trial and error just to kind of find whatever you think works. That's probably too much. That works for now. Yeah. We will like seeing some of that blue in there. Okay, so we'll go with that. And now we've got some nice purple light filling our scene. That looks great. All right, so those are the windows. Let's go up to our sign up here. This guy. And we want to give that a texture as well. So it's going to be a similar process. However, for this texture, and we can look back at our image here, this is a specific layout. And so what I did is I actually laid this out perfectly in Photoshop. And the way that I did that is I exported the UV layout. So let me show that. Get rid of that image. I'm going to go into edit mode on that sign. We see our UVs are right here. So what we can do is we can, let me actually maximize this. Oh, that's right. For whatever reason, okay, the menu's just collapsed here. It's this little hamburger icon. If you go to View, UV, you have Export UV Layout. Let me make sure we select everything first. But View, UV, Export UV Layout, and then we can export as a PNG, and we'll go with 2048 by 2048. Oops, 2048. Fill opacity, that's fine. And then I'm going to choose to export to my textures, and we're going to call this Sign Large Panels UVs recording, because I'm recording it, but you can just call it Sign Large Panel UVs or whatever works for you. I like to throw UVs in there so I know that that's what it is. But I'll hit Export UV Layout, and then I will jump over to my file browser and find that one specifically, right click, and I'm going to open that with Photoshop. Okay, so that opens up. This is what those UVs look like. It's a very simple UV layout because it is really just 2 polygons, 2 rectangles. If we look at something like the vending machine screen, actually I need to open this in Photoshop. Okay, so there's what the UVs for the vending machine look like. For the vending machine screen, this is how you can lay out and put your numbers exactly where they need to go. But here's our very simple UV layout. And let me also open up my existing one. Now, I'm using Photoshop. You can use other image editing applications. I'm not doing anything fancy here. I'm just adding some text and some outlines. That's it. So, let's see. That's right. I should be naming these groups better. There we go. Okay, so all I did is I created a little box outline. Let me bring up my UVs so you can see them. There we go. Or we'll name them. I'll bring them up to the top of the layer stack. It's still tough to see because I had a black background, but if I temporarily turn off the black background, you can see that my UVs are in fact there. I'll zoom in, you can see the UVs there. And then I could use that as a basis for laying out my design. And we can turn on our guides. So I did use some guides in Photoshop to lay things out and make sure everything was the way that I wanted it to. And that's just drawing whatever you want that sign to say. Now, Google tells me that this text says Blender. I am taking Google's word for it. I do not speak Japanese. I do not write Japanese. But as far as just purely in aesthetic terms, this fits in with the cyberpunk sort of theme. Okay. So that's why I went with it, and I obviously went with our cyberpunk purple. So once I had that, then I just exported that as a with the black background. Make sure you turn off your UVs, otherwise those UVs will be part of the texture. Okay, so we want to make sure we turn those off. And then I just exported that as a either a JPEG or a PNG. Doesn't matter which one. I did a JPEG. Although a PNG would probably be better for a graphical image such as this. Okay, so that's all I did to make those. Once I had that sign laid out, we can go back into Blender here. Okay, and we need to remove the UV test grid material. Get out of edit mode. Add a new material, and we'll call this large sign. Okay. And then we're going to do much the same thing. So instead of going through and making all those nodes again, what I'm going to do, once Blender catches up, because it looks like we have reached a slight hiccup here. Hopefully this doesn't crash on me. Jump over to Photoshop and close those down. And maybe Blender will start working again. There it goes. Okay. Let me hit save just in case. Okay. So what we can do instead of rebuilding all that node from hand is we can just select our existing windows, and I'm just going to hit Control C to copy all those nodes. Go back to my sign and then delete this node with X, and then Control V to paste, G to move them around, reconnect the shader to the surface output, and then here we just need to click this little folder icon and navigate to our sign panels. Click Open Image. Okay, now you can see that the mapping is all messed up, so we can just right-click on this. I think we can right-click on the node. I'm pretty sure there's a way to reset the node. I just don't remember what it is. So we'll just set all of the location data to 0, and we'll set all of the scale data to 1. And now we can see our node is in frame. Excellent. So a couple things that we now need to think about, now that we have our texture set up, is we can look at our emissions. Right, and I'll rename this. We can hit N, and we can both name and label it. I don't believe the label shows up on the node. Oh, it does. Okay, so the label is what shows up on the node. The name, I think, just stays there. But I'm going to call this, I'll call it scene emit. And then this one I will call camera emit. Okay, so we can kind of keep track of which one is which. All right. So the scene emit is how much light is it casting on the scene. And it's casting quite a bit of light. And I'm going to leave that at 100 for now. That's fine. It's kind of working for me. You know, maybe you could bring it down to 80 or 60 or whatever. We'll leave it at 100 for now until we know what textures are going to be on the walls, because that a really rough, dark texture can kind of eat up some of that light. And it might look really bright now, but the textures could change that. So I'm going to leave that alone. But as far as how it looks on camera, it's looking a little bit washed out, a little bit faded. So I'm going to bring this camera emit down, and we can try 5. That's looking better. We can try 1, and that looks all right, but it doesn't quite look like it's glowing. So let's try 2. And that's definitely better. We can maybe try 3. Yeah, I'm good with 3. So there we go. That's setting that up. Now, if we want to take this a little bit further, and you want to be kind of picky about this, I'm kind of 2 minds. So normally right now, how these signs are, is it's just a graphic, like in real life, these signs are just a graphic printed on a piece of like Lexan or plexiglass, something like that. And so the box actually holds a light and it's lighting up everything, right? This is, in this case, is not a neon sign. It's just a big box sign. And so there's light behind everything. It's behind the purple and it's behind the black areas. But if you want that black to appear darker, what we can do is we can use another texture to do that. So what I did in Photoshop is I exported out a second version that's just black and white. And I'm going to use this texture to tell Blender where I want light to come out from. So I'm going to use this as an emission texture. Okay, and so it's going to work just like any other texture. It's on a black to white scale. Black is going to have a value of 0, and white is going to have a value of 1. And so it can do that on a per pixel basis. Basically, you can't really see the pixels. It also looks like I did not turn off the UVs. So shame on me. I will open this up real quick and do that, because that's going to bother me if I don't. Okay, here it comes. And turn off those UVs. See, it's a subtle difference, but it's definitely there. And I'm going to hit Save for Web, which is Control-Alt-Shift-S. I know it's an older feature of Photoshop. It's just muscle memory in my hands at this point. I'll click Save. I'm going to choose that same sign, because we can just overwrite that. That's fine. We can replace that. Okay. We have that. I'll save this. Get out of there. Okay, so we have that emission texture. Now, this is going to get a little bit complicated, but follow along. You'll be fine, I promise. I'm also going to, on this light path node, I'm going to click this little arrow. It's going to collapse that light path node, and I can move that out of the way. And we'll hit N to hide that. I'm going to grab these and move those over here. So what we want to do is we want to use that texture to control the strength of the emission. All right. So I'm going to take my sign image texture. I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate it. And we'll move it underneath. How about? Okay, so sign panels, and then this one. And we're going to connect up the mapping to that. Let's also take a moment to name this. So this is going to be emit. And this is going to be color. Okay. So if we just plug the emission directly in to the strength, it's going to get darker. Okay. Now, one note, we're only going to notice this difference on if we adjust the strength. If we adjust the strength for the scene, excuse me, let me say that again. We're only going to notice the difference for the camera. If we're looking at the sign, like right here, we're only going to notice the difference when we mess with the camera settings. The scene, we're not going to notice the differences on the object, but we will notice it on the background. Okay. Now, we want to, with this texture, we want to make sure we set the color space to non-color. So it's just going to use that black and white data. It doesn't care about the actual colors. But everything is darker, and the reason for that is the strength is using a black to white image, and that image is just a value of 0 to 1. Remember, 0 is black, 1 is white. So even for the areas that are white, it's only going to give out a strength of 1. And we want it to be 110. So we need to add one more node to each branch. And that is a converter math node. I'm going to hover it over here. And I'm going to set the value, or first for add, I'm going to set it to multiply. Okay, so it's going to multiply whatever existing color is there by whatever value I input. So in this case, it's going to take all the black, which is 0, and it's going to multiply it by this value. Now, 0 times anything is still 0, so we don't have to worry about that. And then the white areas, which is a value of 1, it's going to multiply by this value. So 1 times 0.5 is going to put out a strength of 0.5. Okay, I can hit, let me hide that. If I select this multiply node and hit Control Shift and click on it, it's going to put out a viewer node. So this is actually the result of the multiply node that we're looking at directly. Okay. So we have 0.5 times whatever's there. If I set this value to 1, that's what we get. Okay, so that gets brighter. But what we want is we want that to be 10. So if white is 1, we want this to be 10. So 1 times 10 is 10. Okay. Okay, and then the last thing is I realized I forgot to load up our actual emission texture. So that's why we're still getting some light coming through the black portion. If I click on open image, now we've got our black and white image. So we can see that this is now what the value is doing. I knew I forgot something. I just couldn't remember what it was. So here's the value of 1. We got black is 0 because 0 times anything is still 0. And the white is 1 times 1 is still 1. So if we bring that up to 10, now that's brighter. That's the emission that we're getting. Okay, so we can take our multiply node and we can Shift D to duplicate it, and I'm going to drag it right over the strength line here. Okay. And this one, if we hit Control Shift and click on it, and change this value to 100, you can see that's a lot brighter, but we're still only getting, it's still completely black in the center. So now we can go back to our final output. So Control Shift, click on the last shader here. It's going to connect that back up. And that's what we get. Oh, that's right. We don't want a value of 2. We want a value of 3. Or, you know, maybe we'll go down to 2. Something like that. Okay, and so that's the final node network for this piece. I'll move these over a little bit. And we can change the name of our multiply nodes as well. So I'll call this one scene emit strength. And this one will be camera emit strength. Okay, so you can kind of see what's going on there. You know, the connections can get a little bit tricky as far as like parsing what is flowing where. So I encourage you to take a little bit of time and try to keep these organized. Okay. Okay. So that's that sign. I did a similar thing with this sign here over the door. So I can go through that really quick. I'm just going to assign our large sign to it. I'm going to click the little copy icon. We will call this door sign. Okay, we actually need to have two material slots. This first one, for now, I'm just going to set back to the UV test grid. There's just this main body. We will tab into edit mode, and I'm going to select this face right here, and then hit Control plus to grow the selection and assign that to my door sign slot there. Okay. And then what we need to do, now this texture doesn't have an emission, so we can get rid of this node. So I'm going to hit X to delete, the emit. Hit X to delete the emit node, and select the two multiply nodes. You can hit X to delete those as well. Still going to use the light path one though, so that works. And then the color node, we want to change that to our door sign. There we go. Okay, and again, I exported the UVs, so I had it all lined up. I'm going to set the strength down. Well, let's go into a rendered view so we can check on that. And we might need that. Let's actually set the scene strength. I'm going to bring that way down to like 40. That feels better. Okay, so there's our door sign. There. Okay, so the last thing that I want to cover is how I did this monkey sign. And now this sign is a little bit different because it is actually geometry. If we go into, it's like a solid view, see that is actual geometry on that monkey sign. So how did I do this? Well, it's actually pretty easy. I did it with curves. So let me open up that scene. And what I did is I added a monkey head, added a Suzanne object, just Shift A, add mesh monkey. Okay, we add our monkey right there. I moved it up 1 unit, and then in this case, I'll just move it over to the side. Yeah, so there's my monkey. And then I added I believe I used a path. Or no, I think I used a Bezier curve. Yes, I used a Bezier curve. So I'll just Shift right click right there, Shift A, add in a curve, Bezier curve. And we'll move this forward in space. Okay, looks great. And then I'm also going to move it over. So we want it to be perfectly centered so that we can use a mirror modifier here. So let me select the monkey, hit Shift S, cursor to selected, select my new curve, Shift S, selection to cursor. Okay, so now it's going to be perfectly centered on the monkey, and hit GY to move it forward. Go back into front view. So in the curve options, I did a bevel depth to give it some thickness, and this is going to be like my neon tubes, right? And then we add a mirror modifier. Make sure we turn on clipping, or I'm going to turn off clipping for a second. We're going to go into edit mode, and I just need to move both of these points over to the side, and then I can go back and I can turn on clipping, and I can move this point back into the center. And so once I had that, in order to get them to actually merge, we need to kind of have them facing into the center. Also scale that down. And rotate it this way. And we'll rotate it in the Z direction there, and then it'll kind of snap together. So once I had that just in the front view, I just outlined the monkey. That's all I did. So we can we'll start like up here, and grab this piece over here, we'll bring it over here, rotate it, scale down the handles. You can see that the clipping does work on the handles as well, so sometimes you might have to turn off the clipping, scale it down, and then we can turn the clipping back on. Okay, that, and then just extrude it around, rotate, adjust the handles just like you were outlining something in Photoshop or Illustrator. Extrude, rotate, kind of go all the way around. And then when I'm ready for the monkey, I'm still in edit mode. When I want to do the ears, I can just hit Shift D to duplicate. We can delete this vertex. So we've got these, and now we can just move and position them however we need to. Rotate that around. Maybe we need to select this handle and scale it up. Maybe we want to scale this up a little bit too to smooth that out. I'll grab this one. I'll move it down right on top of the other curve so that they intersect. And then we can rotate that around, something like that. Okay, so that's what I did for the monkey. Once I had that, just make sure you name it. In this case, I named it Neon Suzanne. All right. And then, don't need to save that. I just appended it into this Blender scene. So I selected this object. I hit File, Append. You navigate to your Neon Suzanne scene, Object, choose your object, click Append, and it popped up over here. but then we can just rotate it in the z-axis 90 degrees. Select our sign, Shift S, cursor to selected. Select our monkey, Shift S, selection to cursor. Okay, and then from here we just need to scale it down, move it down, position it, and then I'm going to delete this one because I already have one in there, obviously. And then I just added a mirror modifier to it. I positioned the origin of the monkey in the center of the sign and added a mirror modifier. And then as far as materials are concerned, just a simple yellow emission. That's really all that was. So we can go back and look at our rendered view here. And there we go. So now we have, oh, that's this scene. I was doing that in the wrong scene. So let me go back to the scene that we're actually working on, which is this one, and I'll do that. Okay, so once more, I'm going to File and Append, choose our Neon Suzanne, go to Object, choose my Neon Suzanne. There it is in the scene. Do this in shaded view. Rotate Z 90 degrees. Select our sign, Shift S, cursor to selected. Select our monkey, Shift S, selection to cursor. Scale that down. Now you can see right now it is perfectly centered on our sign. Okay, so let me move this down first. We still need to scale it down a little bit. I want it to fit in there. So I'm going to go into edit mode, select everything, and I'm going to hit G and Y, move it in the Y direction. Whoops, X, I mean, GX. There we go, just so it's kind of floating just in front of the sign. I do this in edit mode because this way, the pivot point will stay in the center. Okay, I don't know why I'm not seeing pivot points though right now. Yeah, I'm not sure why I'm not seeing those. But that is where the pivot point is. I'm also going to hit M and move this to my camera and lights collection. So once I have that in there, then I can add the, in this case it's going to be the Y direction because it's rotated. So what we could do, just so this makes maybe a little bit more sense, is I can hit Control A and apply rotation. Okay, so now we need to switch our mirror modifier to the Y direction. And that'll recomplete our monkey. Turn on clipping as well. And then X, and now that makes sense with the global orientations. But either way you do it, now we have our monkey. And the last thing we need to do is give it our material. So I'm going to click New. I'm going to change this, and we don't even need to do this in the shader editor. You can, but you don't need to. We'll call this Neon Monkey, because why not? That's not how you spell monkey, though. Neon Monkey. Change this to an emission shader and choose a nice bright yellow and set your value to whatever you deem appropriate. We also check our scales. Yeah, for whatever reason, it just feels like it's stretched in the Y direction, so maybe we'll scale that down just a little bit. That feels better. All right, now let's check our rendered view. And that's looking pretty good. Okay, now one thing to note is that as we take this monkey and in edit mode, as we move those curves, G, X, further and closer, further away from and closer to the sign, we're going to get kind of different effects as far as how much glow is hitting the rest of that sign. So kind of find a point that works for you. If you're just getting too much in general, you can just turn that strength down. We can try like 5. Okay, this is not a sign that I need to have the light affecting the whole scene. 100 would be way too much. Also, if we do 100, this starts to glow kind of white. But 10 works pretty well. Okay, and I think that's actually it for the lights. Again, we'll tweak these intensities as we go if we want something to look a little bit better. Adjustments for whatever reason. But as far as adding lights and setting up any emissive surfaces, this is it. Next, we'll actually start adding textures to our whole scene and really make this begin to feel real. And I'm looking forward to that. So that's the next video.